"Sir, you are getting off this aircraft. Now." The command cut through the first-class cabin so sharply that conversations stopped before anyone understood why. Marcus Bennett looked up from seat 2C and found Robert Caldwell standing in the aisle, his dark navy suit perfectly pressed, his security identification visible against his chest, his expression carrying the certainty of a man who expected immediate obedience. Marcus remained seated. His charcoal jacket was folded neatly across his shoulders, a small leather travel bag rested beneath the seat ahead, and his phone lay face down on the tray table. Nothing about him suggested urgency. Nothing about him suggested danger. Yet nearly every face in the cabin had turned toward him. "Tell me exactly what I did," Marcus said. Robert's jaw tightened. "We received a report concerning suspicious behavior." "What behavior?" "Sir, I am not debating this with you." Marcus studied him for a moment. 15 minutes earlier, he had boarded with a valid first-class ticket, placed his bag beneath the seat, and quietly watched the turnaround process outside the window. He had noticed something unusual on the service display near the boarding door and asked a flight attendant whether the final verification had been completed. It was the kind of question almost no ordinary passenger would ask. Marcus knew that. He also knew asking a question was not a security violation. "Did I threaten anyone?" Marcus asked. "That is not the issue." "Did I refuse a crew instruction?" Robert said nothing. "Did I enter a restricted area?" Marcus continued. "Did I touch equipment I was not authorized to touch?" "Did I interfere with boarding?" A few passengers exchanged uncomfortable looks. Robert lowered his voice. "Your behavior raised concerns." "Whose concerns?" Marcus asked. The silence lasted 1 second too long. That was when Marcus understood the problem was no longer about anything he had actually done. "Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here." Now, back to Marcus. Near the forward galley, Maya Thompson stood frozen beside the boarding door. She had heard the original conversation. She knew Marcus had spoken calmly. She had also watched the description change as it moved from one employee to another. Curious became unusual. Unusual became concerning. By the time Robert arrived, concerning had become suspicious. Marcus looked toward Maya for only a moment, and she immediately lowered her eyes. He noticed. Robert extended one hand toward the exit. "You can cooperate voluntarily, or we can continue this conversation outside." Marcus slowly picked up his phone. Several passengers watched as if waiting for him to prove whatever they had already decided about him. He slipped the device into his pocket, reached beneath the seat for his bag, and stood. At 6 feet 2 inches, his height seemed to make Robert shift backward half a step before recovering. Marcus noticed that too. He did not raise his voice. "I will walk off this aircraft because I will not delay these passengers," he said. "But before I take one step, I want you to answer one question." Robert stared at him. Marcus held his gaze. "If you cannot identify a single rule I violated, what exactly are you removing me for?" The cabin became completely silent. Robert opened his mouth, but no answer came. Marcus picked up his jacket and turned toward the door. As he passed the galley, his eyes stopped on a small verification screen glowing beside the service panel. One status line was still amber. Marcus slowed. The timestamp beside it was wrong. And suddenly, being removed from the plane was no longer the most serious problem he had seen that morning. Marcus stepped through the aircraft door without looking back, but the silence from the cabin followed him into the jet bridge. Robert Caldwell walked several feet behind him, close enough to maintain control of the situation without saying another word. Marcus carried his leather bag in one hand and his charcoal jacket over the other arm, moving at the same measured pace he had used when boarding less than 20 minutes earlier. At the gate, travelers waiting for later flights glanced toward them. Some saw the security identification on Robert's suit and immediately looked at Marcus differently. A woman pulled her carry-on closer. A man standing near the charging station watched with open curiosity. Marcus noticed every reaction and responded to none of them. Robert directed him toward an empty section beside the gate counter. "Wait here while we document the incident." Marcus set his bag beside his chair, but remained standing. "Document what incident?" Robert exhaled slowly. "We have already discussed this." "No," Marcus said. "You gave me a conclusion. I asked for the facts behind it." Robert glanced toward the boarding door, where Maya Thompson had just stepped into the gate area. She stopped when she saw both men. The crew reported that you were closely observing operational procedures and asking unusual questions, Robert said. Marcus nodded once. Correct. What rule prohibits that? Most passengers do not monitor turnaround operations. Being unusual is not being dangerous. Robert's expression hardened. You also demonstrated knowledge of internal procedures. Knowledge is suspicious now. You are twisting my words. Then make them precise. Maya stood 20 feet away, pretending to organize boarding documents while listening to every sentence. She remembered exactly what Marcus had asked inside the cabin. He had pointed toward the verification display and calmly asked whether the final service confirmation had been completed. Claire Whitmore, the senior flight attendant, had immediately become defensive. Within minutes, she had told the gate supervisor that Marcus was watching the crew too closely. The description had grown with every retelling. Maya looked down at the report in her hand. The words aggressive questioning appeared near the top. Her stomach tightened. Marcus had never been aggressive. Robert opened his tablet. Your removal was authorized under passenger security discretion. Marcus stepped slightly closer, still leaving several feet between them. What observable behavior justified that discretion? Robert looked at the screen. You made the crew uncomfortable. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Discomfort is not evidence. The words landed harder because he did not raise his voice. Behind Robert, Maya finally looked up. Marcus saw her. This time, she did not look away. Were you inside the cabin when I asked my question? Marcus asked Robert. No. Did you speak with every employee who witnessed the conversation? Robert hesitated. I spoke with the senior crew member. Did you speak with her? Marcus gestured toward Maya. Robert turned. Maya froze. She was present, Marcus said. Robert looked back at him. This is an internal matter. Then investigate it internally before you punish a passenger publicly. Robert's face tightened, but before he could respond, Marcus looked through the glass toward the aircraft. The amber status line he had seen remained in his mind. He knew the turnaround sequence for Apex Horizon Airlines better than almost anyone in the building. That verification should have been completed before boarding reached its current stage. Marcus reached into his pocket and checked the time. I have one more question, he said. Robert gave a tired sigh. What now? Marcus pointed toward the aircraft. Who signed off the final turnaround verification for that flight? Robert stared at him. That information is none of your concern. Marcus looked toward the gate display, then back at Robert. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. You may want to reconsider that answer. At that exact moment, a woman in a gray executive suit emerged from the operations corridor, walking quickly toward the gate with a tablet pressed against her side. She scanned the area, saw Marcus standing beside Robert, and stopped cold. The color drained from her face. Mr. Bennett, she said. Robert slowly turned toward her. The entire balance of the room changed before anyone explained why. Robert looked from the woman in the gray suit to Marcus, then back again. You know this passenger? He asked. The woman did not answer immediately. She was Rebecca Lawson, Chief Operating Officer of Apex Horizon Airlines, and she had spent the last 12 years learning how to remain composed during emergencies. For several seconds, that discipline failed her. Mr. Bennett, she repeated, lowering her voice. We had no idea you were traveling today. Marcus picked up his leather bag. That was intentional. Robert's expression changed. Wait, Bennett. Rebecca finally looked at him. Marcus Bennett, our Chief Executive Officer. The words seemed to remove every sound from the gate. Maya stopped moving behind the counter. Robert stared at Marcus as if the man standing before him had somehow transformed, although nothing about Marcus had changed. Same charcoal jacket, same white shirt, same calm expression. The only difference was that Robert now knew his title. Mr. Bennett, Robert began. There appears to have been a misunderstanding. Marcus held up one hand. No. His voice remained quiet. Do not change the description because you know my name. Robert fell silent. Marcus stepped toward the gate window and looked at the aircraft. 5 minutes ago, I was a suspicious passenger whose questions were none of his concern. If the facts have changed, tell me how. Robert glanced toward Rebecca. She offered him no rescue. The crew raised a security concern, he said carefully. What specific behavior? Marcus asked. Robert looked at his tablet. You were observing operational activity. Passengers look out windows. You asked questions about internal procedures. Passengers asked questions. Robert's frustration surfaced. You knew details an ordinary passenger would not know. Marcus turned toward him. So your evidence that I was dangerous was that I knew too much? Maya lowered her eyes again, but this time from discomfort with the answer, not fear of Marcus. Rebecca opened the incident report on her tablet. Who filed the original concern? Senior cabin crew, Robert said. And who interviewed Mr. Bennett before authorizing removal? Robert hesitated. I spoke with him inside the aircraft. Marcus shook his head. You gave me an instruction. That is not an interview. Rebecca's face tightened. Were any other witnesses questioned? Robert looked toward Maya. Not yet. Marcus followed his gaze. Then start now. Maya looked startled. Rebecca approached her. Tell us exactly what happened. Maya swallowed. Mr. Bennett asked whether the final turnaround verification had been completed. He was calm. He did not threaten anyone. He did not refuse instructions. Robert looked at her. The senior flight attendant described his questioning as aggressive. Maya gathered herself. I did not see aggression. Marcus remained silent. He did not smile. He did not look triumphant. The truth should not require celebration. It should have been collected before the decision. Rebecca turned toward Robert. Why was he removed? Robert stared at the report as if hoping the words would become stronger under pressure. The situation was interpreted as a potential security concern. Marcus finally spoke. Interpreted by people who never established what I actually did. Nobody answered. Then Marcus pointed through the window toward the aircraft. Now we have another problem. Rebecca followed his gaze. What problem? The turnaround verification. Her attention sharpened immediately. Marcus explained the amber status line and the timestamp he had seen while leaving the cabin. Rebecca opened the operational dashboard on her tablet. Her expression changed as she scrolled. That cannot be right. Robert frowned. What? Rebecca looked at Marcus. The final service verification was entered 4 minutes after boarding began. Marcus's face became still. Who authorized the sequence? Rebecca checked again. The system shows an automated release pending manual confirmation. Marcus looked toward the aircraft, where passengers were still waiting to depart. Stop boarding. Robert stared at him. Rebecca did not hesitate. She raised her radio and issued the instruction. Within seconds, the gate agent closed the boarding lane. Marcus turned back toward Robert. You removed me because I noticed something your own process failed to catch. Robert said nothing. Marcus looked at Rebecca. Find out whether this happened only on this aircraft. Rebecca immediately began making calls. Marcus watched the airplane through the glass. He had boarded expecting to quietly observe one flight. Now one incomplete verification had opened a question far larger than Seat 2C. And if the same weakness existed elsewhere in the network, nobody at that gate was going anywhere soon. Rebecca Lawson moved fast. Within 3 minutes, the aircraft at Gate 32 had been placed on an operational hold. The captain had been notified, and the station operations team was pulling every digital record connected to the turnaround sequence. Marcus Bennett stood near the window, watching ground crews continue their normal work beneath the aircraft, while passengers inside waited for an explanation. Robert Caldwell remained several feet away, no longer directing the situation. For the first time that morning, he was watching Marcus make decisions without needing to announce his authority. I have operations control on the line, Rebecca said. She placed her tablet on the counter and activated the speaker. Daniel Foster, Vice President of Safety, answered immediately. We pulled the record. The final service verification was completed, but the digital confirmation posted after boarding started. Marcus looked at the screen. Was the aircraft released before the confirmation? Technically, the workflow allowed a conditional status. That is not what I asked. Daniel paused. Yes. Rebecca's expression tightened. Marcus remained calm. How long has the system allowed that? We do not know yet. Then find out. Robert stepped forward. Mr. Bennett, if the service item was eventually completed, this may simply be a documentation delay. Marcus turned toward him. Maybe. Robert seemed surprised by the answer. Marcus continued. And maybe it is evidence that our system allows people to complete critical steps in the wrong sequence. We do not guess when safety is involved. Daniel spoke through the tablet. I can run a network audit on recent departures. Start with every aircraft scheduled to depart in the next 2 hours, Marcus said. Do not stop flights that have already been independently verified. Hold any departure where the same sequence cannot be confirmed. Rebecca nodded and relayed the instruction. Robert watched her. You are going to delay flights across the network because of one timestamp. Marcus looked directly at him. No. Safety is going to determine whether we have one timestamp or a system problem. There is a difference. Maya Thompson stood behind the counter, listening quietly. The same man who had been treated like a threat minutes earlier was now protecting passengers who would never know his name. Yet Marcus showed no satisfaction. His attention remained on the records. Rebecca's tablet began receiving updates. Chicago showed 2 delayed confirmations. Atlanta showed 1. Dallas showed 3 records requiring manual review. The pattern was not proof of unsafe operations, but it was enough to justify immediate verification. Daniel's voice became more serious. Marcus, we may have a workflow issue affecting multiple stations. Robert looked toward the aircraft. How serious? We will know when we finish checking. Marcus picked up his jacket and placed it over the back of a chair. Then nobody pressures the safety team for speed. Rebecca looked at him. Operations will push back if this expands. Let them. The financial impact could become significant. Marcus turned from the window. A delayed flight costs money. A company that cannot trust its own verification process costs everything. Robert lowered his eyes. The words seemed to reach beyond the aircraft. Marcus noticed, but said nothing. A new alert appeared on Rebecca's screen. 12 departures had now been temporarily held for manual confirmation. Then 21. Daniel returned to the call. We need broader authority to review the entire active departure network. Rebecca looked at Marcus. Marcus did not answer immediately. He looked through the glass at the aircraft that had started everything, then toward the passengers waiting inside. You have it, he said. Hold every unverified departure until safety clears it individually. Rebecca began issuing the order. Across the network, aircraft that had not yet departed remained at their gates while verification teams went to work. Robert stared at Marcus. You are grounding the fleet. Marcus shook his head. I am grounding uncertainty. Then Rebecca's tablet chimed again. This time, the alert had nothing to do with aircraft maintenance. Compliance had searched the incident system using the same language that had been used against Marcus. Suspicious, intimidating, aggressive. 83 passenger removal cases appeared on the screen. Marcus read the number twice. The problem had just become larger again. 83 cases. Marcus Bennett stared at the number on Rebecca Lawson's tablet, while the airport continued moving around them as if nothing had changed. Across the network, safety teams were checking aircraft one by one, but Marcus now faced a second question that had nothing to do with mechanical systems. What exactly did compliance search for? He asked. Rebecca opened the report. Passenger removals involving subjective behavioral descriptions. Suspicious, intimidating, aggressive, unusual, and similar terms. Robert Caldwell stepped closer. Those words appear in legitimate security reports every day. Marcus looked at him. Then legitimate reports should contain legitimate evidence behind them. Robert said nothing. Rebecca scrolled through the first case. A black physician traveling from Atlanta had been removed after questioning why another passenger had been assigned his seat. The report called his repeated requests confrontational, but documented no threat. Another case involved a black college professor who photographed the view from his window before departure. Someone reported that he was recording operational activity. Security questioned him and removed him after he objected to surrendering his phone for inspection. A third involved a mother traveling with 2 children who became frustrated after a gate change separated her from promised boarding assistance. Her frustration had been recorded as aggressive behavior. Marcus read each summary without speaking. He knew 3 cases did not prove a pattern. He also knew 83 cases could not be dismissed without review. How many resulted in formal complaints, he asked. Rebecca checked. 31. How many received independent review? Rebecca's eyes moved across the screen. I do not see any. Marcus looked at Robert. Who reviews passenger removal complaints? Usually the station first, then regional security if necessary. Your department, among others. So the people responsible for the decision may also be responsible for deciding whether the decision was wrong. Robert's expression hardened. That is an unfair characterization. Marcus nodded toward the tablet. Then the records will prove it. Maya Thompson remained nearby, uncertain whether she was still needed. Marcus noticed her and gestured gently. Maya, I need you to do something. She straightened. Yes, Mr. Bennett. Write down exactly what you saw today. Do not discuss it with anyone before you finish. Do not change your language because of what you now know about me. Maya nodded. I understand. And include anything you said before security arrived. Her face changed. Marcus caught it immediately. What is it? Maya hesitated. I told Claire that I did not think you were threatening anyone. Robert turned toward her. Before you came on board. Rebecca looked sharply at the incident report. That statement is not here. Maya swallowed. I told the gate supervisor to. Marcus's expression became still. Who wrote the final report? Robert took the tablet from Rebecca and checked the record. Claire submitted the initial concern. The station supervisor summarized the witness information. Marcus looked toward the aircraft. Then preserve every version of that report. Rebecca immediately contacted compliance. Robert frowned. You are treating an incomplete note like deliberate misconduct. Marcus turned back to him. No, I am refusing to decide what it means before we have evidence. You should recognize the difference. The words left Robert silent. Rebecca's phone rang. She answered, listened, and then looked toward Marcus. Safety has completed the first group of inspections. Most aircraft are clearing normally. Marcus nodded. Good. But compliance found something else. She turned the screen toward him. Several older passenger complaints contained employee witness statements in their original files. Those statements were missing from the final summaries used to close the cases. Marcus studied the records. The same pattern appeared more than once. Employees had questioned whether removals were justified. Their concerns had disappeared somewhere between the incident and the official conclusion. Marcus slowly looked at Robert. Who had authority to edit these reports? Robert did not answer immediately. Rebecca checked the access history. Her face changed. Regional security leadership. The gate suddenly felt quieter. Marcus looked at the 83 cases again. He had been removed from one airplane that morning. Now he was beginning to understand how many people might have walked the same path without anyone powerful waiting at the end of it. Marcus Bennett asked for a private conference room before another word was said about the archived cases. Within 15 minutes, he sat at one end of a long table with Rebecca Lawson, Robert Caldwell, the head of compliance, and two independent legal advisors connected by secure video. Safety teams continued clearing aircraft across the network, but Marcus had separated the two investigations immediately. One involved operational verification. The other involved people. Neither would be allowed to contaminate the evidence of the other. Start with access history, Marcus said. The compliance director opened the first archive complaint. This report was created by a station supervisor 3 years ago. 2 employee statements were attached. The final version contains only one. Who removed the second? Marcus asked. We cannot say yet. The edit was made through a regional administrative account. Robert leaned forward. Those accounts were shared by authorized supervisors at the time. Marcus looked at him. Including you? Yes. The room became quiet. Robert immediately continued. That does not mean I made the edit. I did not say you did. Marcus's tone remained even. That is why we are checking evidence instead of making assumptions. Robert leaned back slowly. The sentence had landed exactly where Marcus intended. Rebecca opened another case. The original statement described a passenger as frustrated but cooperative. The final summary described the same passenger as increasingly hostile. A third file contained an employee note saying there was no immediate safety threat, yet the closing report stated that removal had been necessary to protect cabin safety. Marcus read every version carefully. Who approved these closures? The compliance director displayed the names. Several belonged to regional managers. Robert's name appeared on two. Marcus looked at him. Do you remember these? Robert studied the dates. No. I review hundreds of cases. Then we will not ask your memory to carry more weight than the records. Robert's face tightened. You have already decided what you think happened. Marcus held his gaze. If I had already decided, you would not be sitting here answering questions. Rebecca looked down, hiding a reaction. Marcus continued. Tell me how your department defines suspicious behavior. Robert hesitated. It depends on context. Give me the written standard. There are behavioral indicators. Which one did I display? Robert looked toward the table. Your unusual interest in operational procedures raised concern. That is not a behavioral indicator. That is an interpretation. Robert finally showed frustration. You are the chief executive officer. Of course you understood what you were looking at. Marcus leaned forward slightly. You did not know that when you removed me. Silence returned. Marcus continued, quieter now. That is the only version of me that matters to this investigation. The man whose title you did not know. Robert looked away. The compliance director interrupted with a new update. We found the original audio from the gate's supervisor's call requesting security. Rebecca activated the recording. A voice filled the room. The supervisor described Marcus as a passenger asking persistent questions about procedures. No threat. No refusal. No aggressive behavior. Then another voice entered the call and said the passenger seemed suspicious because he appeared unusually familiar with airline operations. Robert stared at the speaker. Marcus recognized the voice immediately. It belonged to Claire Whitmore. The recording ended. Marcus looked around the room. Preserve it. The compliance director nodded. There is more. She opened the metadata attached to the incident. The word aggressive was added 17 minutes after you had already been removed from the aircraft. Rebecca looked at Robert. By whom? The director studied the access record, then slowly raised her eyes. The edit came from a regional security terminal assigned to Mr. Caldwell's office. Robert went completely still. Marcus did not accuse him. He did not raise his voice. He simply folded his hands on the table and asked the question that now mattered more than anything else. Robert, who had access to that terminal this morning? Robert Caldwell stared at the access record for several seconds before answering. My assistant, 2 regional supervisors, and I had access to that terminal this morning. Marcus Bennett remained still. Did you use it after removing me from the aircraft? Yes. Rebecca Lawson looked toward Robert. For what purpose? To complete the incident documentation. The compliance director turned her laptop toward him. The system shows your credentials were active when the word aggressive was added. Robert's face tightened. Then I probably added it. Nobody spoke. Marcus watched him carefully. Probably. Robert exhaled. I was documenting the situation based on the information available to me. What new information did you receive after I left the aircraft? Marcus asked. Robert hesitated. The crew's concerns. You already had those concerns before removing me. Robert looked down at the table. Marcus continued. Did anyone tell you afterward that I threatened them? No. Did anyone report that I refused an instruction? No. Did anyone describe an action that became more aggressive after I had already left? Robert's silence answered before his words did. No. Marcus leaned back. Then why did the report become more serious after the event was over? Robert looked toward Rebecca, then the compliance director, but neither interrupted. Because I believe the removal was justified, he finally said. Marcus nodded slowly. So the report was written to support the decision. That is not what I said. Then explain the difference. Robert's voice became defensive. Security decisions happen quickly. We do not always have perfect information. I understand that. Marcus's answer surprised him. But imperfect information is not permission to improve the facts after the decision. Robert looked away. The compliance director opened another document. We reviewed the 2 archived cases approved under Mr. Caldwell's name. Similar language changes occurred in both. Robert immediately shook his head. I did not personally write every report my office approved. That may be true, Marcus said, and the investigation will determine it. Robert looked at him. What happens to me now? Everyone expected Marcus to answer immediately. He did not. He looked through the glass wall toward the terminal, where departure boards were slowly returning to normal as safety teams cleared aircraft. You were temporarily removed from Operational Security Authority pending independent review, Marcus said. Robert's expression hardened. You were suspending me because of what happened to you. No. Marcus turned back toward him. I am separating you from decisions connected to records your office may have altered. If the evidence clears you, the record will say so. Robert stared at him. And if it does not, then the evidence will say that too. Rebecca quietly closed the incident file. Marcus looked toward the compliance director. Contact every employee connected to the 83 cases. Preserve original statements, revisions, access histories, and complaint records. Nobody edits anything from this moment forward. Understood. Marcus stood. His phone vibrated with an update from Daniel Foster. More than 70% of the held departures had been individually verified and released. No aircraft had been found with a known unresolved safety condition, but the workflow weakness was real and required immediate correction. Marcus read the message and handed the phone to Rebecca. Good news? She asked. Better than the alternative. Then the compliance director received another alert. She opened it. read silently, and frowned. "We found something in the archived policy records." Marcus looked at her. "What?" 5 years ago, several station managers warned that the passenger security standard relied too heavily on subjective judgment. They recommended requiring documented observable behavior before removal. Rebecca leaned forward. "What happened to the recommendation?" The director opened the approval history. "It was rejected." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "By whom?" She turned the screen toward the table. One name appeared at the bottom of the decision. "Thomas Grant, former vice president of customer security operations." Robert looked at the name and went quiet. Marcus noticed immediately. "You know something?" Robert hesitated, then finally met his eyes. Grant did not just reject that recommendation. He trained every regional director to stop questioning instinct when safety was involved. Marcus looked again at the 83 cases. The investigation had moved beyond one report, beyond one security director, and beyond one morning at Gate 32. Someone had built this system to reward certainty before evidence, and Marcus was about to find out how deeply that lesson had spread. By late afternoon, the operational hold was steadily lifting, but Marcus Bennett had stopped watching the departure numbers. The safety team had confirmed that the workflow weakness required correction, yet no aircraft had been found operating with a known unresolved condition. That problem was becoming manageable. The other one was growing. Inside the conference room, Rebecca Lawson placed a 5-year-old policy review on the main screen. Thomas Grant's name appeared beneath the final decision, rejecting stronger documentation requirements for passenger removals. Robert Caldwell sat at the far end of the table without operational authority, present only because Marcus had asked him to explain how the policy had been taught. What did Grant mean when he told regional directors to trust instinct? Marcus asked. Robert looked at the document. After several security incidents across the industry, leadership became afraid employees would hesitate when something felt wrong. So they were encouraged to act first, when necessary, and document later? Robert did not answer. Marcus waited. Finally, Robert nodded. Sometimes. Rebecca opened one of the archived training presentations. A sentence appeared across the screen. "Uncertainty should never prevent decisive intervention." Marcus read it twice. That sounds responsible until nobody defines what creates the uncertainty. The compliance director brought up the 83 cases. Independent reviewers had completed an initial comparison of 27. 17 contained vague descriptions without a clearly documented prohibited action. 11 involved employees who had raised questions about the escalation. In 6 of those cases, the concerns were absent from the final summary. "Do we have demographic data?" Marcus asked. "Not consistently," the director replied. "But based on available records, Black passengers appear disproportionately represented among the cases involving subjective language. We need an independent statistical review before drawing a final conclusion." Marcus nodded. "Then do not announce a conclusion before the evidence supports it. But do not ignore what the preliminary data is telling us either." Robert shifted in his chair. "Grant never told us to target Black passengers." Marcus looked at him. Bias does not need to appear in a written instruction to influence a decision. Robert's expression tightened. Marcus continued. "If a policy tells people to trust discomfort, but never requires them to explain what caused that discomfort, every assumption they carry can enter the process unnoticed." The room became quiet. Rebecca opened another case. A Black businessman had been removed after another passenger complained that he was repeatedly looking toward the cockpit door. The original witness statement later clarified that the man had been checking the overhead display above the doorway because his connecting flight was delayed. That clarification never appeared in the final report. Marcus stared at the file. Was he compensated? He received a travel voucher. Marcus looked away. "We gave him a coupon instead of an answer." The compliance director received a new message. "Thomas Grant has agreed to speak with investigators tomorrow morning." Robert looked surprised. He agreed. Voluntarily. Marcus stood and walked toward the window. Outside, another Apex Horizon aircraft pushed away from its gate after receiving individual safety clearance. Good. He gets the same process everyone else gets. Rebecca joined him near the glass. "The board wants an update tonight." Marcus nodded. "Give them the facts. They are concerned this could become public." Marcus turned toward her. "It should concern them more that it happened in private." Rebecca said nothing. Behind them, the compliance director opened another archive folder and suddenly stopped. Marcus. He turned. What did you find? She rotated the screen. The folder contained dozens of internal complaints that had never reached the independent review level. Employees had reported concerns about subjective security escalations for years. At the top of the routing history was a recurring instruction directing each complaint back to the regional office involved in the original decision. Marcus looked toward Robert. Who approved that routing structure? Robert stared at the screen. His answer came quietly. The executive committee. Rebecca's face changed. Marcus returned to the table. The problem was no longer hidden inside one department. It had been built into the company itself. And somewhere above Robert Caldwell, people who had never met the passengers in those 83 files had created a system that made it almost impossible for those passengers to be heard. The executive committee meeting began at 7:30 that evening, less than 12 hours after Marcus Bennett had been removed from Seat 2C. By then, nearly every aircraft placed on temporary operational hold had been individually verified and returned to service, while engineering teams worked on correcting the workflow that had allowed confirmations to post in the wrong sequence. But inside the executive conference room, nobody was discussing departure times. Rebecca Lawson sat beside Marcus as 5 board representatives appeared on the wall screen. The first question came quickly. How contained is the passenger incident? Marcus looked at the speaker. Contained. From a reputational standpoint, Marcus was silent for a moment. A passenger was removed without a documented violation. Witness information was omitted. The report was strengthened after the removal. We have found dozens of older cases requiring independent review, and your first question is whether the story is contained. The board representative shifted in his chair. We are responsible for protecting the company. So am I, Marcus said. That is why we are going to tell ourselves the truth before we tell anyone else a smaller version. Rebecca placed the archived routing policy on the screen. For years, complaints about security decisions had been sent back to the same regional structures involved in those decisions. The policy had been approved by an executive committee before Marcus became chief executive officer. One board member leaned forward. That structure was designed for efficiency. Marcus looked at him. Efficiency for whom? Nobody answered. The compliance director joined by video and presented the preliminary findings. 27 cases reviewed. 17 lacking clearly documented prohibited conduct. Multiple employee concerns missing from final summaries. Demographic patterns requiring independent analysis. Marcus listened until she finished, then turned toward Robert Caldwell, who had been invited to provide information but no longer held operational authority. Robert, I want to ask you something, and I want the answer without titles in this room. Robert nodded cautiously. Marcus continued. When you boarded that aircraft this morning, what did you actually investigate? Robert looked down. I reviewed the crew's concern. You reviewed their conclusion. What did you investigate? Robert remained silent. Did you ask what specific action I took? Not before asking you to leave. Did you interview Maya? No. Did you verify whether I had threatened anyone? No. Did you establish whether I had violated a rule? Robert's voice was quieter now. No. Marcus leaned back. Then you did not investigate me. You interpreted me. The words settled across the room. Robert looked toward the table. I believed I was protecting the flight. I believe you believe that, Marcus said. That is exactly why this matters. Robert raised his eyes. Marcus continued. A person can believe he is being responsible and still make a decision shaped by assumptions he has never examined. One board member interrupted. Marcus, we should avoid turning an individual judgment error into an accusation against the entire organization. Marcus looked toward the screen. This morning, I had something 83 other passengers did not have. What? The power to force everyone to keep looking. Silence followed. Marcus stood and walked toward the window overlooking the runway. Aircraft lights moved steadily through the darkness as normal operations returned. If I had been an accountant from Cleveland, a teacher from Baltimore, or a father flying home to his children, my complaint might have been routed back to the people who removed me. The file might have closed. The language might have stayed. And nobody in this room would know my name. Rebecca watched him carefully. Marcus turned back toward the board. We are appointing an independent external review. Every one of those 83 cases will be reopened. Every affected passenger will be contacted. Every employee statement will be restored to the record. The board representative frowned. That could expose the company to significant liability. Marcus nodded. Then we will face the consequences of what the evidence proves. His phone vibrated on the table. Rebecca checked the message and handed it to him. Thomas Grant had provided investigators with archived training materials and internal correspondence from his years overseeing security operations. One message contained a sentence repeated across multiple regional directives. Decisive action must be defended consistently after the fact to preserve confidence in frontline authority. Marcus read it twice. The room seemed to grow colder. This was no longer a system that had merely tolerated bad assumptions. Someone had taught people to protect the decision after it was made. Marcus looked at the board. Tomorrow morning, we find out who knew. By 8 the next morning, Marcus Bennett was back in the same airport, but this time he was not sitting in seat 2C. He stood inside a secure conference room with Rebecca Lawson while independent investigators reviewed the documents Thomas Grant had preserved. Robert Caldwell remained suspended from operational authority, and Marcus had ordered that no executive involved in the old policy review participate in deciding the investigation's outcome. The first records were troubling enough. Regional leaders had repeatedly been instructed to support frontline security decisions once a passenger had been removed, even when later evidence raised questions about the original judgment. The stated purpose was consistency. In practice, it created something far more dangerous. People were encouraged to defend decisions instead of examining them. Who approved this language? Marcus asked. The lead investigator opened an email chain from 5 years earlier. Thomas Grant had written the directive, but several executives had reviewed it before distribution. 2 still worked for the company. Rebecca recognized the names immediately. Both are senior vice presidents now. Marcus did not react. Interview them separately. Rebecca nodded. The board may object. The board asked who knew. We are going to find out. An hour later, Thomas appeared by secure video. His hair had gone gray since leaving the company, but his voice remained firm. The policy was never intended to encourage discrimination, he said. Marcus watched him carefully. Intent is one question. Effect is another. Thomas nodded. After several industry security failures, everyone was terrified of hesitation. We believed employees needed confidence to act. And when they acted incorrectly? Thomas paused. We worried that reversing decisions too often would make frontline teams second-guess themselves. Marcus leaned forward. So passengers carried the cost of preserving employee confidence. Thomas looked away from the camera. When you say it that way, it sounds terrible. I am saying it according to what happened. The investigator displayed a memorandum from the same period. It recommended independent review whenever removal reports relied primarily on subjective terms. The recommendation had been rejected after senior leadership argued that outside review would slow case closure and undermine regional authority. Marcus read the names attached to the decision. One belonged to a current board advisor. Rebecca stared at the screen. This goes higher than we thought. Marcus remained quiet. The investigator then opened preliminary demographic findings from the reopened cases. The sample was incomplete, but the disparity was significant enough to demand a full external analysis. Marcus refused to let anyone turn preliminary numbers into a final accusation, yet he also refused to let uncertainty become an excuse for delay. Effective immediately, no passenger removal based solely on subjective descriptions will be approved without documented observable behavior, he said. If there is an immediate safety concern, employees act. If there is time to investigate, they investigate. Those are not competing principles. Rebecca wrote down the directive. And the complaint process? Independent review. No complaint goes back exclusively to the department whose decision is being challenged. Thomas remained on the screen, listening. Marcus, he finally said, you are rebuilding an entire system because one decision happened to reach the wrong person. Marcus looked directly into the camera. No. His voice was calm. I am rebuilding it because the wrong decision reached the one person you could not quietly ignore. Nobody spoke. Marcus stood and looked through the conference room window toward the terminal below. Thousands of travelers moved between gates, each carrying a destination, a schedule, a life invisible to the employees making decisions around them. Most would never meet the chief executive officer. They should never need to. Rebecca's phone vibrated. She read the message and slowly looked up. The board has called an emergency session. Marcus turned toward her. About the investigation? About you. She handed him the phone. Several directors were demanding that Marcus narrow the public response, arguing that reopening 83 cases and acknowledging systemic failures could damage the company for years. Marcus read the message once, placed the phone on the table, and picked up his jacket. Then they still do not understand what is at risk. Rebecca followed him toward the door. In less than 30 minutes, Marcus would face the people with the power to remove him from his own position. And for the first time since leaving that aircraft, the question was no longer whether he could change the system. It was whether the system would try to stop him. The emergency board session began without ceremony. Marcus Bennett entered the executive conference room with Rebecca Lawson and took the empty chair at the center of the table. 6 directors appeared on the wall screen. 2 others sat across from him in person. Nobody mentioned what had happened on the aircraft the previous morning. They went directly to the numbers. The operational hold cost the company millions in delays, rebooking, and recovery expenses, one director said. And now you want to reopen 83 passenger cases, commission an external review, and publicly acknowledge weaknesses before the investigation is complete. Marcus folded his hands on the table. I want to acknowledge what we know and investigate what we do not. Another director leaned forward. The public will not hear that distinction. Then we explain it clearly. You are risking the brand. Marcus looked around the room. The brand was already at risk. We simply did not know it. The director nearest him shook his head. There is another option. Treat your removal as an isolated failure. Discipline the employees directly involved. Correct the safety workflow. Review the remaining complaints internally. Marcus remained silent long enough for everyone to understand that he had heard every word. And what happens to the passengers whose complaints were already reviewed internally by the same structure they challenged? Nobody answered. What happens to the employees whose statements disappeared from final reports? Still nothing. Marcus continued. Yesterday, I was removed from one of our aircraft without anyone identifying a rule I had broken. The only reason that incident reached this room is because someone eventually recognized me. One director interrupted. Your position makes the circumstances unique. Marcus turned toward him. That is exactly the problem. The room became still. I did not deserve fair treatment because I am the chief executive officer. I deserved it when Robert thought I was nobody. Rebecca watched the faces around the table change. Some showed discomfort. Others showed resistance. Marcus did not soften the point. If our system works only when the person being questioned has enough power to challenge it, then our system does not work. A director on the screen asked the question everyone had been avoiding. And if the board instructs you to narrow the investigation? Marcus looked directly toward the camera. Then that instruction becomes part of the independent record. Silence followed. Is that a threat? No. It is transparency. Rebecca placed a document on the table. The independent investigators had completed a preliminary preservation review. The evidence confirmed that multiple complaints had been routed back to departments involved in the original decisions, and that several reports had been materially revised after incidents occurred. The investigation had not yet determined intent, but the process itself was clearly compromised. Marcus pushed the document toward the directors. This is no longer about protecting me from embarrassment. It is about whether we protect ourselves from accountability. One of the oldest board members removed his glasses. What exactly are you proposing? Marcus answered without looking at his notes. Independent review of all 83 cases. Direct outreach to affected passengers. Preservation of every original record. Temporary removal from decision-making authority for anyone whose conduct is under investigation. New standards requiring observable behavior instead of unsupported labels. Protected reporting for employees who challenge an escalation. And external oversight of discrimination complaints. The room stayed quiet. Then the oldest director nodded once. Another followed. The resistance did not disappear, but the balance shifted. By the end of the meeting, the board authorized the independent review by a narrow majority. Marcus stood, but Rebecca's phone vibrated before they reached the door. She read the message twice. The investigators finished tracing the missing witness statements. Marcus turned, and Rebecca looked toward the directors who were still gathering their papers. The removals were not random administrative edits. Someone created a standing instruction years ago allowing regional offices to exclude statements considered inconsistent with the final security determination. Marcus slowly looked back at the table. The board had just voted to investigate the past. Now the past had handed them written proof that the system had been designed to silence its own contradictions. The written instruction changed the investigation immediately. By noon, the independent review team had traced the policy to an internal guidance document approved 4 years earlier, allowing regional security offices to exclude witness statements they considered irrelevant to a final determination. The language sounded administrative. Its effect was not. Statements supporting a removal were usually preserved. Statements questioning one could be classified as inconsistent, duplicative, or unnecessary. Marcus Bennett read the guidance twice before placing it on the conference table. "Who approved this?" he asked. Rebecca Lawson opened the authorization history. Thomas Grant had signed the original guidance, but 3 senior executives had reviewed it. 2 remained with the company. 1 had participated in the emergency board discussion less than 2 hours earlier. Marcus did not react publicly. "Remove everyone connected to this policy from oversight of the investigation," he said. "Effective immediately." Rebecca nodded. "Including the executive vice president, especially anyone with authority over the records." By afternoon, Apex Horizon Airlines announced a series of immediate reforms to employees across the company. Passenger removals would require documented observable behavior whenever circumstances allowed investigation. Subjective labels alone would no longer justify escalation. Employees who disagreed with a security decision could submit protected statements that could not be deleted from the official record. Complaints involving discrimination or unequal treatment would be reviewed outside the department involved in the original incident. Marcus also ordered direct contact with every passenger whose case had been reopened. "No automated letters," he told the customer care leadership team. "A real person calls them. We listen before we explain." Robert Caldwell remained on administrative leave while investigators reviewed his decisions. Claire Whitmore and the station supervisors involved in Marcus's removal were also temporarily reassigned away from security-related decisions pending individual review. Marcus refused demands for immediate public punishment. "Accountability without evidence is just another version of the mistake that brought us here," he said. Maya Thompson, meanwhile, received written protection as a cooperating witness. Her original statement was restored in full. When Marcus saw her near Gate 32 later that afternoon, she looked uncertain about approaching him. "Mr. Bennett," she said quietly, "I should have spoken louder yesterday." Marcus stopped. "You spoke before security arrived. But when nobody listened, I stopped." Marcus considered her words. "Courage is not always one moment, Maya. Sometimes it is deciding what you will do differently the next time." She nodded, holding back emotion. "There will be a next time, will there not?" Marcus looked across the terminal. There is always a next time for someone. 3 weeks later, the independent review released its first findings. Several passenger removals had been properly supported by documented safety concerns. Others had not. In multiple cases, subjective assumptions had influenced escalation, and the old complaint structure had failed to provide meaningful independent review. The company contacted affected passengers, issued apologies where findings supported them, restored travel privileges where appropriate, and established a compensation process overseen independently. Robert's investigation found no evidence that he had personally altered the older archived reports, but it confirmed that he had added unsupported language to Marcus's report after the removal. He accepted responsibility and was removed from his regional leadership position. Months of retraining and independent evaluation would be required before he could return to any role involving passenger security decisions. Marcus did not celebrate. The purpose had never been to destroy Robert. It was to make sure the next person Robert encountered would be judged by behavior instead of assumption. 6 months later, Marcus returned to the airport alone, wearing the same charcoal jacket he had worn that morning. No executive team followed him. No employee announcement marked his arrival. As he walked toward his gate, a raised voice near a customer service desk caught his attention. A young black passenger stood across from an employee, frustrated over a seating error. A security officer was nearby. Marcus slowed his steps. For a moment, the scene looked painfully familiar. Then the employee raised one hand toward security and said calmly, "We are fine here. Give me a minute to check what happened." Marcus stopped. The real test of everything they had changed was beginning 20 feet away. Marcus Bennett remained 20 feet away, close enough to hear the conversation, but far enough that nobody noticed him watching. The young black passenger stood beside a carry-on bag, his frustration visible but controlled. "I paid for that seat because I need the extra legroom," he said. "I am 6 feet 4 inches tall, and I booked it 3 months ago." The customer service employee nodded. "I understand. Give me a moment to check the original reservation." The security officer remained nearby, but did not move closer. Nobody called the passenger aggressive. Nobody treated his frustration as a threat. The employee studied her screen, then looked up. "You are right. The seat was reassigned during an aircraft change. That should not have happened." The passenger's shoulders relaxed slightly. "So what happens now?" "I fix what we can fix." She checked another screen and called a supervisor. Within minutes, they found an available seat with comparable legroom and refunded the original seat fee. The employee apologized without blaming the passenger for asking questions. The security officer quietly walked away when it became clear there was no safety issue. Marcus watched the young man pick up his bag and head toward the gate. No one around him applauded. No executive stepped forward. No dramatic announcement followed. That was exactly why the moment mattered. The system had faced a frustrated black passenger who held no visible power, and this time, it had chosen facts before assumptions. Marcus turned toward his own gate and continued walking. As he passed gate 32, memories returned with surprising clarity. The silence inside the cabin. Robert Caldwell standing in the aisle. The eyes of strangers deciding what Marcus might have done before anyone bothered to ask what he actually did. 6 months earlier, Marcus had walked through that gate carrying humiliation that could have disappeared into an incident report. Instead, one question had exposed another, and another, until an entire company was forced to examine what it had normalized. The operational verification system had been rebuilt. Independent safety audits were now routine. Passenger complaints involving discrimination received external review. Employee witness statements could no longer be removed simply because they challenged a final decision. The reopened cases had produced apologies, compensation, policy changes, and difficult conversations across the company. Not every finding proved wrongdoing. That mattered too. Justice required evidence in every direction. Maya Thompson had been promoted into a passenger advocacy training role, helping employees understand that asking questions was not defiance and discomfort was not proof. Robert had completed months of evaluation and training before accepting a non-security position elsewhere in the company. His final conversation with Marcus had been brief. "I kept thinking I was protecting people," Robert had said. Marcus had answered, "Then learn to see every person as someone worth protecting." Now, standing near the windows overlooking the runway, Marcus watched an Apex Horizon aircraft climb into the afternoon sky. He understood that no policy could erase every prejudice from every human heart. No training program could guarantee perfect judgment, but a fair system could force assumptions to face evidence before they became consequences. Marcus adjusted his jacket and walked toward boarding. The gate agent scanned his pass without recognizing him. "Have a good flight, sir." Marcus smiled. "Thank you." He entered the jet bridge as another ordinary passenger, and that anonymity felt different now. 6 months earlier, being treated like an ordinary black traveler had revealed everything wrong with the company. Today, somewhere behind him, another ordinary black traveler had been treated with patience, dignity, and fairness without anyone needing to know his title. Marcus had grounded aircraft for hours, reopened years of buried complaints, challenged his own board, and risked the position he had spent decades earning. But this quiet moment was the victory that mattered most. Real justice was never proven by how a system treated the powerful after recognizing them. It was proven by how that system treated people when it believed nobody important was watching.